Thank you very much. Thank you, Irene and David, for those findings, somber findings, if I may say so. And of course, we'll remember David's words. We are at a crossroads. We can either risk further pushbacks or we can increase our efforts by taking 3 steps forward. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. And if you want further information on these findings, you can go to the on-site computers, but if you're online, go on your computers, and you can consult the findings on your specific country that you're interested in. There's a deep dive index workshop with a focus on the share of care in the afternoon, and we have experts on site who can provide you with additional information. And also, we now have our first panel discussion where you will have a chance to interact and ask questions of our panelists. You can do so either by raising your hand in this room, and we will give you the floor, or if you're online, you can go on the Q&A and chat box and pose your questions there. So now, as I said, we're going to have our first panel, and I would like very much the panelists to join me up here on the stage. First, Evelyn Regner, Vice President of the European Parliament. The Parliament, of course, has its own... Hi, Evelyn, how are you? You have your own European Parliament week on gender equality as well, of course. Also, please join me, Klara Lorenčíková, please, Czech Commissioner for Human Rights, representing the Czech presidency perspective. Esther Lynch, hi Esther, from the European Trade Union Confederation. Thank you so much. And Cad Bourlugnon is joining us online. She is Chief Impact Officer at Content Square, EIC board member as well, talking about startups and women in tech. So, ladies, thank you. I'm going to first ask all 4 of you to give me a very quick kind of reaction to the findings that Irene and David have brought forward on the Gender Equality Index that they brought forward. So if I could start with you, Evelyn, please.
So I hope my micro already works.
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay,
yes.
Great. I mean, a crossroad. So somehow I think there is a lot of politics that has to be done. So my findings, my conclusion is, I mean, it's in our hands, and I think more than ever, full gender mainstreaming, full emphasis on gender equality issues should be on the political agenda.
Right, absolutely. So full emphasis on gender equality. Klara, if I could ask you, I think you can turn it on. Your first reaction to what you've just heard.
I'm sorry, I think I have something.
You just hold it towards you.
I think it's not.
Could we help Klara out, please? In the meantime, let me turn to you. Esther, do you have a microphone?
I do, I might.
Great.
So, yeah, okay. So.
Great.
So it's great to be here with everybody and great to hear the results of a really important report. And I think what the report demonstrates is the need for immediate action. If we're going to have 3 steps forward, it's important that we know what those steps are, that everybody's on board to take them, and we back each other in to make sure that this slogan of leave no one behind, it's easy to say it, but very hard to see the evidence of what's going to be done to address that. And I think the report is very clear about COVID pushing women back into the home rather than the workplace, and that's a real issue of concern for trade unions.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? So 2.5 years really have meant almost, rollbacks on some of the gains that were made. That's really somber, isn't it? Thank you for that. Klara, does it work now? Could we please have a sound engineer to come and help out? In the meantime, let me turn to Kat. Kat, are you online? And if you've been watching, get your first reactions. Hi there.
Noted more questions than I did reactions. A lot of us on this panel are doers. So immediately we're going to look at the report and we're going to wonder, how do we mobilize a lot of the learnings for this to make things even better? And so I guess one of the main questions that I had is really for the countries that performed better, what were the actual factors? What were the success factors that contributed to that change, and how can we learn from it? Also, we spoke a lot about COVID, but something that we know is that we also have a few crises on the horizon, right? We're looking at an energy crisis, we're looking at an economic crisis. Based on those learnings, what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that things don't spiral backwards again?
Thank you very much. And I see that Clara's microphone has been replaced. So, Clara, if we could have your first reactions, please. I think just start speaking, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah. Just hold it to your mouth and start speaking.
Okay.
With the mic.
Just bring it to your mouth.
Cara, if
I think it is turned.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think it's okay already. Thank you for understanding. I wanted to say thank you, dear Aige, for the index. It's very helpful for us that we have this tool and we can monitor how we can manage all the measures on the state's level. And I think we need to explain what are the linkages between the problems of this present moment, and without gender mainstreaming, I think we won't be able to solve the problems of today. I think we need to explain that the data from index are not just abstract statistical numbers, but they tell us that a lot of women, especially today, need to solve real serious problems. They have problems to buy quality food for themselves or their children. They have a problem with paying their bills for energy or school lunches for their children, and we know that a lot of women are dependent from this reason on their partners in the cases of domestic violence, and it means that it's extremely difficult for them to leave the violent partner. We need to link those numbers with these particular stories and explain that gender mainstreaming must be one of the strategic priorities of all public policies. So
Right.
thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your first reactions as well. So, Evelyn, we've been told, we're told every day that there are so many crises, and it's real. We face them, we feel them, we live them. All these crises, the terrible war in Ukraine, of course, the pandemic hasn't gone away. There are dangers that it's coming back, and we have to be prepared. Energy shortages, inflation rising, and cost of living increases as well. So my question to you is, in the midst of all these crises, there is a temptation among certain, let's say, male politicians, among others, to push aside the question of gender equality. But I'd like to ask you, you're doing a whole week on gender equality at the Parliament. Why should it remain? Tell us, why should it remain a core issue going forward?
I mean, don't you know all that? It's always about gender equality, and when other so-called other topics are popping up, and then you just look around, prices in energy are exploding. So energy poverty, I mean, whose topic is it? So we deal with women. There is a gender aspect in there, a huge one. Same with exploding food prices, with exploding prices for living. So who is suffering? When you just look a little bit deeper, who is exposed when the VAT is too high? Who is exposed when needing housing for single mothers, for example? And then let us look at the war in Ukraine. I mean, look at those women coming right now and looking for a situation how to deal with children. I mean, we have an enormous overview of issues. When you just look a little bit deeper, there is a huge issue on gender equality, and that's also the reason why we have a focus in the European Parliament, because we have to do the full gender mainstreaming, and be it artificial intelligence being included, or as it is when we're talking about violence. I mean, look at this gender dimension in it. So just do it the other way around. Finding a solution, trying to solve those problems is hardly possible, is impossible, I dare to say, if we don't fully include the gender perspective.
So that's the main issue, isn't it? To absolutely have gender perspective when we're talking about the world economy, the European economy, the war, the crisis, climate change, and of course now, as you say, energy shortages that lie ahead, actually feeling it. Luckily, we have a moderate winter so far, but this is going to hit us as well. So, Clara, if I could ask you also, from the member states' perspective, from the Czech presidency's perspective, is there a real risk, and what is the risk if we lose this gender equality focus at this very crucial time?
As we already heard during the COVID-19 and now because of the war in Ukraine, we can see that the biggest impact of crisis is often on vulnerable groups, mainly women. And we have a lot of data now that in the families we can see a high level of toxic stress, and it's always connected with other problems in the families, domestic violence and other forms of violence. We know that the number of the people who have serious mental health problems is increasing, and that we don't have enough capacities in psychiatric and psychotherapeutic services, and that at this moment we need to be more coordinated, and we need to work as a team, and we need to understand and explain what are the languages between the problems, and we must find the solutions through this gender perspective, gender mainstream perspective. So I can say now that we believe that with data, with mindset which is connected and which is grounded by the data knowledge, we can be successful in solving the problems of this moment. But without gender perspective, we won't understand what are the linkages between the problems, and we won't be successful in the solutions.
Right, and of course it's a joint effort. I mean, Carleen said that in the beginning. It's a joint effort. Everybody has to take those 3 steps forward. So, I mean, the Czech presidency, yourselves can't really do anything unless you have people, other member states going with you. Thank you very much indeed, Clara, for that as well. So Esther, let me turn to you. A lot has been said about the sectors that COVID-19 has most impacted. And of course, we've talked about sectors which are essential and are dominated by women. So I was just wondering, from your point of view, what can be done to give these jobs, essential jobs, which seem to be undervalued by our societies and by our economists, how can we get them properly valued, do you think?
I'm really happy you asked me that question, because this is what I most wanted to come and to ask, was for help. So we need help to get the Gender Pay Transparency Directive over the line, and you need to do it before the end of your presidency. That is the major step forward. And it has to be the legacy of the COVID crisis that we finally value properly the work of caring, the work of cleaning, jobs predominantly done by women. And I notice even in EGA's own report on page 12, you say that the pandemic has increased economic vulnerability for many, especially women with a low level of education. And that's true. But I think we need to challenge the assumption that only jobs that have a high level of education are valuable and worthy of high pay. And I want to congratulate my colleague Aileen, who's in the audience here, and I know that she'll be able to have to take the floor, perhaps from the floor later. But she's produced this guide to negotiating for equal pay for work of equal value with a checklist. And what we really need your help with in that directive is to make sure that unions can get in and bargain, finally, to end the injustice of low pay for all those jobs.
Right, I think that's the one very important, and you've already got a round of applause, so I think that's something that we really have to focus on as well, not undervalue, absolutely. Kat, you are online, and I want to ask you the same sort of question. Of course, you're in the digital world, high-tech world, also dominated by men, and gender representation needs to be stepped up there as well. But also, if we are losing the focus on gender equality because we're sort of confronted with so many crises, what are we missing out on? What do we need to accelerate progress, do you think, now more than ever? A point that's been made by Helena Dali, by Carleen, etc. Please.
There's so many angles to look at this when it comes to tech, right? And maybe there are 3 that I think are the most important. One has to do with the allocation of investment. We talk a lot about jobs, but what about actually starting and launching these companies that are raising hundreds of millions today? Today, if you look at, say, European unicorns, I mean, less than 2%, I think, have been founded by women. And so, that also has to change. And so what I'm talking about here is also access to leadership roles, access to funding, access to capital, access to networks, which is a completely different ballgame. And then you have a second thing in tech, which is, Esther was speaking earlier about the sort of different statuses that certain roles could have. And in tech, that tends to, the sort of crowning glory tends to go to tech, like the developers, the product managers, DevOps, and so on. And today there's still an alarmingly low percentage of women that are finding their way into these roles. Now, that's one of those lifelong things that needs to be changed. It needs to be addressed very early on, from the time where little girls are being socialized into the kind of roles that they're interested in, the kind of advisory support that they get, for example, in high school when they're thinking about their new careers. But I think in the long run, given that this is an area in which a lot of value is being created, our ability to address this issue very early on in that overall pipeline is really crucial. And I think there's the third part as well, which is, again, let's go to leadership. I am a big fan of the Gender Pay Transparency Directive and really hope that it becomes the new normal very soon. And something that I'd be very curious to see is not just equal levels of pay, but when it comes to going from entry level to middle management to senior management and to, let's say, the C levels, where are we losing women? Right? Because I think it's not just about where they are at a specific moment in time, but their overall journeys. And I think those are some of the things that we will need to focus on as well if we're playing the long game.
So Kat, just a very, very quick follow-up. In terms of, we've been talking about getting more girls, women, into the tech sector for a long time now. Do you see a change happening? Do you see more young women, even older women, joining the tech sector, changing a little bit the dynamics?
I mean, there's a tremendous amount of effort there, right? Like, if I could just speak, for example, for Content Square, for other unicorns that I've had the pleasure of working with, there are a lot of recruiting programs that are very specialized towards women. There are a lot of recruiters that are very specialized in women. There are a lot of programs, sponsorships, schools, so many things that you could do. And the truth is that there's still a lot of progress to be made there. But at the end of the day, I think as the European Union, some of the things that we may be interested in tracking is the overall pipeline from high school. Mm-hmm. Not even talking about like from the time that they apply, really like from high school and in the direction in which they're going. I think it starts very early. To be honest, I feel that we may have a bigger impact on all of this as potential parents, as uncles, as aunts, than we may have as policymakers. And it's also really striking to see, I don't know how many people watch The Queen's Gambit, for example, which I thought was just really interesting to show the power of media on perception of gender roles and how it triggered the sudden purchase of, hundreds and thousands of chess sets by little girls, right? So again, like I think there are some things where we have a responsibility as policymakers, as leaders, and another one where we have responsibility as human beings and as parents.
Thank you very much, Kat. I'm going to do a second round of questions with all four of you, but I would really like to engage with you because we've been listening to some very important findings. We have some questions, perhaps we need some inspiration. So please do either go online or in about 10 minutes or so, 5-6 minutes, please raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. So Evelyn, let me just turn to you again. If you have any quick remarks on what your colleagues have said, please don't hesitate. But just to say, there's a lot of talk about informal care, and we've seen during the pandemic how much of that burden has fallen on all of us, let's be very frank. We've all had to do more than our share because we've looked after the kids and we've worked and all the rest of it. We've heard about it in the findings. And the European Care Strategy has come out in September. I was just wondering, from your point of view, what needs to happen now? How quickly do we need to move? What are the decisions that you think need to be taken?
We always have to do two things, changing culture and doing binding measures. So you always need a package of the two, and of course they are very much interlinked. When we talk about informal care, we also have to talk about both aspects, about paid care and unpaid care. And also those two are very much linked together because as we are used to society where, if it's getting hard and even if men somehow is doing some care work, the mental load, the responsibility at the end of the day usually always is with the women. And when you just also look, of course, men do look after if somebody's getting ill or the children or the elderly, but somehow it's if it is possible somehow, yeah, and not if it is really necessary and if it's coming at the last second. And therefore our society still more than ever, and that was really the huge outcome of everything what we did, watching and analyzing very careful what COVID did with our society, was the care strategy is absolutely needed simply for everything in order to come to more equal society. So we have to go to the equal earner, equal carer model. And you know all those examples that COVID made also men caring more about children and elderly and the ill ones, but it made women care far more.
That's
so
right.
somehow again it was women, and therefore this strategy that has to be done has to have a focus on offering affordable, high quality, really somehow really accessible care in all sectors, that it's not at the end of the day that women are more or less those being, those catching up. And therefore we need both the appreciation, as Esther said, for all care jobs, because they are so important for the whole society. And on the other side, the inclusion of men as well. So we just have to go for both. And in the Pay Transparency Directive, we're really pushing very much that we have to learn to compare apples with pears, that we have to look not only at equal pay for equal work, but also work of equal value, and then simply to compare sometimes jobs where we haven't been really used to compare them, and this is the big job, and therefore I'm looking very much forward to the next IGE conference, including half of the men participating, because the whole change of culture is only possible if we really push and engage men to be in the same way on board.
So just a quick follow. And in the European Parliament, Evelyn, as the Vice President, I mean, you're pushing very hard for it, and you're getting support from everyone, from the male members as well for these?
No, so far, yes, but let us look when we have it on the table. So somehow at the moment we are negotiating pay transparency, where of course all the care work is also a huge issue in there, because we are talking about work of equal value. And as a next step with the care strategy, yeah, we have to go for that. And then we're just exactly where you have been with your first question. So somehow let us include all these issues as being a huge part of the solutions, also for going for a more sustainable future in ecologic terms, as we know that all those care jobs are not very CO2 active, so somehow it's also a question to a more sustainable future in an ecologic sense.
Right, so, you know, we were all, at 8 o'clock for some time, we were all clapping and applauding our essential workers. Maybe we should put our money where our hands are, really, in terms of paying as well. So from the member states' point of view, Clara, as well, from the member states' point of view, are we doing what it needed on this, on gendered inequalities in the care sector? Informal care and formal, yeah.
I'm very happy that we have this care package, and I know that we must work very hard now on the implementation of this package into the practice level in concrete states around the EU. I just wanted to say, if I have a few seconds, what we try to do during our presidency, Czech presidency of the EU. The main priorities of the Czech presidency in the area of gender equality are the strengthening of the economic position of women and the prevention and elimination of gender-based violence. These priorities are also expressed in Trio Declaration on Gender Equality adopted by the Czech Republic in January 2022 together with France and Sweden.
Right.
under the first priority, we have been working on the Pay Transparency Directive proposal. We have already organized the first political trialogue with the European Parliament and the Commission, and next political trialogues will follow in October and December. The Czech presidency has also finished the negotiation of the Women on Boards Directive. The directive was formally approved last week after more than 10 years of negotiations, and I'm very glad that now the companies will have to support balanced representation of women and men in their boards actively. We have also prepared Council conclusions on gender equality. The conclusions focus on the impacts of the economic crisis on gender equality with a further focus on the young generation. And tackling gender-based violence is another priority of us. We have been negotiating the Violence Against Women Directive as well as the ratification of the Council of Europe Convention Against Violence Against Women by the European Union. And hopefully the process of ratification will be finished during the Swedish presidency. I just wanted to say that we try to work very hard, and I know that the process won't be very easy, but I believe that during the Swedish presidency the process will be successful finished. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Clara. So Esther, if I could get your point of view on this, the importance of moving forward on this.
So I'd like to say a second step forward. So a second step forward that again we could really do with help on is in relation to including the workplace in the directive that's going to deal with gender violence. Now, while it is true that the health and safety legislation already deals with a lot of that, it's not the case for everything. And if I can just give one example. I don't know if this is the right word to use, but revenge porn.
Yes, it is.
So the reason that works and the fear of it works is because the person who's threatening the worker with it knows that they'll lose their job once the pictures come out. Or if they don't lose their job, they're not going to get promoted. And when they lose their job, they're going to find it very hard to get another job because of the amount of searches that happen online now about very ordinary jobs. People Google everything now and Google who you are going back and what you did on your Facebook page and what somebody said about you. And I think it has to be an unlawful discrimination by an employer to discriminate against somebody because they've been the victim of revenge porn. And that's just one of the ways in which we need to understand the modern world and the way in which new harassments are occurring. And I was struck by that about the world of tech. So we have this brand new set of jobs, brand new industry, and it's the most sexist. I mean, that has to be a thoroughly depressing indictment on a lot of the actions that have been taken, that we need to get to grips with this in a very serious way. So really, if we can get your help to include the world of work and those new forms of harassment and violence and the emotional violence, if we can, get that recognized and the importance of that within the directive, that would be a second step forward.
But Esther, we've talked about, and Evelyn said it's about legally binding directives, but it's also about mindset changes.
Yes.
So on mindsets.
Yeah, so I actually was thinking about that when Evelyn was talking about the mental workload. So very recently I witnessed a conversation, and it was between a husband and a wife, and he was driving to the shop to pick up the shopping, and he phoned her to say what's in the fridge. So she had the mental load of knowing what was in the fridge and what would need, even though she wasn't going to be doing the shopping, he was going to be doing the shopping, right? So it is that, relationships as well, and about managing to really support each other as men and women and support each other in the workplace, to challenge all stereotypes wherever we see them. And importantly, to call out harassment whenever we see it, to call out, to name it when it's happening. I know research on bullying shows that the way in which you stop bullying is within the first 10 seconds of somebody witnessing it, they say that's bullying, stop it. So I think all of the focus on harassment at work has been on the person who's receiving the harassment and somewhat on the person doing the harassing. And there has been an insufficient focus on the environment and the other people in the environment, and on empowering those people so that they know it's their responsibility to say and call the person out when they see the harassment. Whereas at the moment, they'll be punished if they do that. They'll be punished by the employer for speaking out and saying, they'll say that's not your job, that's HR's job. You know? So it is about a whole of workforce response to calling out any sexism, any discrimination.
Thank you very much. Kat, coming in online, so Esther has said very clearly, I mean, it's really, really, how should we say it, quite bizarre and unfortunate that a modern sector like high-tech is still suffering from the same kind of underrepresentation. But my question to you really is about the care gap. And if we were to attract more talent, would it be creating more jobs for women, for instance, in the tech sector? Would it be improving Europe's competitiveness in today's world?
I mean, for sure. I mean, there are a lot of, I hate pulling out this card because there's something about it that sounds like, borderline Machiavellic. But the truth is that, the tech sector overall is in the middle of a talent war. You can see companies today scrambling to get the best in every space, whether that's product, sales, marketing, UX, and so on. And one of the ways that you would really, and different governments have had different ways of approaching this. So prior to joining Content Square, I actually ran a team called the French Tech, which was President Macron's team entirely dedicated to bolstering the startup ecosystem. Our strategy was really threefold, right? It was unlocking a lot of it had to do with immigration, right? Because the tech sector in the European Union overall is still quite young, and a lot of seasoned talent can be found everywhere. So there was a lot of work that was done on creating very innovative tech visas. A lot of work that was also done on unlocking that talent from research, and some work. Maybe not enough, and there's really a lot more that we can do in unlocking the talent in underrepresented minorities, whether they're women, people from general sort of backgrounds that are underrepresented in tech, whether those are people with disabilities, refugees, people from the rural areas, and so on, because Europe actually does need this talent. It's going to be something that's going to be fueling the future, moving forward. And so if you look at it from that macroeconomic perspective,
right.
Beyond the social justice perspective, this is not a battle Europe can afford to lose. And one of the ways to do it is to look at how we're handling it at a domestic level, at our own home, when it comes to the kind of biases that create barriers for great talent, women and so on, that can actually access these roles.
Thank you very much, Kat. So I've got a few questions coming in online, and I was wondering if there's anyone in the room as well. So I have a person over here. If you could just put up your hand, second, and 4 questions in the room and 2 questions online. Let's start with the person in the room here first, the gentleman here. Please stand up. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Panayotis. I'm a board member of the European Youth Forum. Thank you very much for your input. As a member of the LGBT community, I can understand how recommendations can support our acceptance and existence in this challenging world. But I do agree with the perspective from the binding legislation. It's good to talk about doing things better, but it's more helpful and more ensuring when there is legislation that we can turn to. And as we can see from the data, member states have so many recommendations. And thinking at the European Year of Youth that we're currently in, we do have a lot of recommendations when it comes to precarious work. But action from member states is not the best at tackling precarious work. We do have the legislation going on platform work, but we do see most suffering being women and young people. If I think about companies that provide rights, how easy and safe is for women to enter that job market? And if they wish to, who guarantees their rights as workers when violence, when threatening, when other exposure because of their own choices to enter the market are insured. There's nothing. A recommendation could do a lot, but I'm not quite sure the private sector would be up for recommendations.
Right.
It will be interfering. And just to wrap this up with what is coming next with the European Year of Skills, we need to think about labor skills and skills for the market, but most important, as a man, having the responsibility of a world to look forward to for future generations is civic skills. Skills that also acknowledge my responsibility as a man to create equal opportunities for women or people of different backgrounds and different learning levels, different choices and in their paths of life and work.
Right.
That's also important to take into account. And I would like to see all of you recommending a little bit more on the binding part rather than another set of recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So keep this in mind when I come to you for your responses. There was a person over there that put up a hand as well. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Christiane Uber from the European Women Lobby and the Austrian Women Wing. And I have a question on the care. We would like that unpaid care is gone, because we have so many people, especially in the private sector, in the household, mothers, daughters, who take care of family members. And not only that they are not paid for, they don't even have a training how to do it well. So we would really want that everybody that is in care has an equal payment. There's nothing like unpaid care, and also an equal training how to take care of the person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's take person there. Yes. Thank you, Dennis. Just, yeah, please. I take 3 questions and then go to you.
Hello, I am Marceline Naudi, and I'm from the University of Malta, but I'm also a member of Grevio, the monitoring group for the Istanbul Convention. I'm very pleased to hear that the gender-based violence against women, remains one of the Czech presidency's focuses. However, I have to say that this has been a priority for one presidency after another, after another, after another. Every time I see it comes up again, I say, oh yay. But in reality, one of the gross as in large violations of human rights is precisely violence against women. It is still happening today, notwithstanding that it has been a priority for one presidency after another, after another, after another. And yes, of course, changing people's mindsets is very important, and it's the basis, if you like, of fighting and combating violence against women. But there's always something else. There's always the economy, conflict. There is always something else that, notwithstanding that violence against women remains a priority, one presidency after another, after another, after another, somehow we don't move forward on it. And I am Mediterranean, I'm passionate, so please excuse my...
Thank you. Thank you very much. And in fact, some of these issues will be discussed in many of the other panels that are coming. I'm going to turn to our panelists for some responses, but I also want to take a few questions that have come online, and then I'll come back to people who feel a bit frustrated they haven't had time to say something. So this is a question that says, you know, when we talk about the gender pay gap, and how it applies to the EU institutions. So really a question for you, Evelyn, is that, is there a gender, what about the gender gap in the EU institutions? How many men and how many women are there, and is there this discrepancy? And then there's a question also about the crisis, online question. Crisis is going to be central to our foreseeable future. This, by the way, is going to be a panel discussion on crisis and gender as well. And what are the steps we need to take to create the conditions, develop the methodology, and build the argument to secure a gender perspective in crisis management? These are very important issues. So let's go back to the panel. So I'll start with you, Evelyn. Yes.
So there are so many questions.
There are, but choose. You can choose.
I just try to answer more of them, but very briefly, so not long. to violence against women, and the legislation and the priorities of the one presidency, one after the other. One sentence to say, the ratification of the Istanbul Convention must remain simply the first priority. We have these proposals right now on the table, but it's the Istanbul Convention that is the golden standard, and I absolutely want to remind all the countries, everybody. Concerning binding measures versus changing culture, I mean, of course, I'm a fan of binding measures. I mean, that's for sure. It's the mosaic of all those binding measures we're putting together really can improve the situation of both men and women. So really to reach gender equality, not only as a snail's pace. And we just see that with the Women on Boards Directive, there were so many also women leaders who always said, we don't need that, we just do some whatever non-binding measures, and then you just end up in a dead end and you don't proceed. And we see right now those countries who introduced quota, or just do it the other way around, those countries who abolished the men's quotas via introducing objective criteria, they proceed and they just change the situation to the better of both, again, men and women, and above all for the companies and the quality standards. So of course we have to go there, but nevertheless always taking on board measures to change the culture. I mean, we simply need that. I don't answer all the others because I think otherwise I'm taking too much time. But this question coming from our online participants, yes, of course, there's also gender pay gap within the institutions and concerning the top positions. But we can really say, just in comparison to most other institutions at the national level, Commission and Parliament are doing quite well. Nevertheless, a long way has to be gone as well. And here really we can say, we do that. We have the Committee of Gender Equality and Women's Rights in the European Parliament doing the job to improve the situation all over Europe, but also our gender mainstreaming network. And this is so important because via this gender mainstreaming network, we are really working on how to improve both salaries, positions, but also the culture of how we do work and how we improve the whole situation of, again, both men and women, and also including the intersectional perspective. We are working on that, and right now we in the European Parliament, we're pushing it very much and working closely together with the Commission, who is really very inspired to go into the politics, to go into the structures, and I think, and I know that IGA is doing an excellent job there, because simply also, again, offering again and again all those facts and figures in order to improve it. Again, a long way to go, but the willingness is absolutely there, and also the structures we are creating.
Thank you. Thank you also for mentioning intersectionality, which is a very, very important part of all of this conversation that we're having. Clara, would you like to answer some of the questions, and including perhaps the one on gender perspectives, and we talk about crises, question that came online.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Would you like to respond to some of the questions that have come in about, whether it should be all legislation, what are the civic skills that are required, and, about from the European Women's League about paying for what we now call unpaid care. I mean, some of the questions that have come forward, and also about gender perspective, a gender lens when we look at the crisis that we face today.
I must agree with the colleague who told about civic education. I wanted to talk also about the youth and the system of education also at schools. I believe that we must develop the civic competencies at schools. We must also develop the system of social emotional learning and include well-being and social emotional learning learning and civic education in the curriculum. I believe that at schools we need to start to improve the skills of the youth to solve the problems in different ways than use the violence as a normal way how we solve the problems and or how we communicate with others. And I agree with everything what my colleague from European Parliament just said. We must stay and be brave, and we must try to do everything to stop the violence and to be very active in this agenda and to create a real system of prevention and early intervention. And we need to create a stronger system of specialized services for the victims of the violence. And we need to do everything for the real equality in the society, to develop the social justice and to protect the social cohesion. I think this must be the priority of everybody, not only the Czech Republic now, because we lead the EU during the Czech presidency. I understand your frustration that a lot of problems which we are talking about, they should be solved before. We must work very hard and we must try to be faster. We try to do our best at this moment, and we will continue in this work in our positions after the presidency. I am now at the position of Czech Commissioner for Human Rights, and I really try to work hard and to cooperate with the NGO sector, with other partners from Czech government, the Ministry for Social Affairs, for Education, for Interior. We really try to work as a team and to solve the problems very quickly. And yes, so
thank you.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Esa, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I'll just take a couple of other questions so they can be fielded by yourself. So let's take one question here, and then I'll take one from the back there. There are other panel discussions, and you will have ample opportunity. Thank you for your interventions. Please, if we could be short and snappy, that would help us a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Renela Ivira from the National Commission for Equality in Malta. We have been, as you can see, I have some age behind me and hopefully in front of me. We've been discussing these issues, these challenges, these needs, these requirements ad infinitum. I come all enthusiastic, trying to see what's new, what's going to happen again. I'm sorry, I don't want to be negative, but I've heard these issues. I mean, we've had new ones now recently with cyber violence and with platform work, but mainly it's the same things.
Right.
So we're working here at legislative level with mainly politicians, and we have trade unions as well. When are we need to look at strategy. What is ours? Is it working?
Okay.
Because if in the last 50 years it hasn't worked very well, we have to do it. So do you have some other ideas about what strategies to use to make more progress? How are we? Politicians are voted in by grassroots, by members of society. Right. What are we doing with these members of society to help them look at the issues in a different manner and to address the backlash that is happening in many of our member states? So good legislation, good particular measures, very good. But what about the voters who are voting the politicians in? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very, very good question. And comes in nicely at the end. There's a hand up there right at the back. And please, if you stand up and ask your question, that would help us. We're coming to the last leg of our panel. Yes, please.
My name is Anna Zobnina, European Network of Migrant Women. Firstly, I'd like to say, some speakers were saying war in Ukraine. There is no war in Ukraine. There is a war by Russia against Ukraine. I just wanted to make this remark. And my question, I wanted to say a special thank you to Esther Lynch for bringing attention to the perpetrators and putting responsibility where it belongs. There are a lot of conversations and initiatives about victims, and we very much appreciate it. And speaking about revenge porn, there is revenge porn and there is also porn, the huge pornography industry. The largest consumers of pornography, where women and girls are sold and trafficked, are raped on camera, are G7 countries. These include EU states. So my question is, do you think, as panelists, that perhaps it is a time to be ambitious and really combat this very grave issue of violence against women and criminalize those men who wake up in the morning, and in Spain, there are about 60% of them, who wake up and think that they should have right to sexual access to women and girls' bodies? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Let me just take a very, very quick question here. Just very, very quick, please. Yes, stand up, please. There's a microphone coming. Very quickly, because I have to go back to the panel. Thank you.
I am the coordinator of GAMAC Europe, and we request all the authorities, even EIGE, that we need data unify to do important work as a journalist, because we are journalists. And the sexist information, the sexist violence in Spain is one thing, in France is another thing, and we have also sexist violence in Europe. But these data are not in one cell, in one...
right.
Sorry, now I don't find the word.
But you're putting the focus on data, the need for data. Yes, absolutely.
One in all Europe.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, harmonized. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And then there's another question online. I'm glad there's so much interventions and questions. And this is about local level. So this is also something I think Evelyn, Esther, and Clara and Carla and Kat, also the local level is very important on this. It's not just what comes from the center, from the EU or the nations, but also local communities and municipalities. Esther, let me go to you, get some feedback on some of the panel comments and questions you've had, please.
So the trade unions do have a plan. We're very focused on our plan. And our plan is to take the legacy of the COVID crisis and to challenge once and for all the idea of low-skilled, no-skilled jobs. We have a directive that's very nearly completed. It will ensure that women and men can discuss their pay, that there's no more pay secrecy, and importantly, that we can bargain not only for the wages in the company, but for wages across the sector, and also to close the gender pay gap, which means moving women up within companies and within the sector. So that's our very clear plan in relation to pay. We also have a plan, you've heard, to ensure that we improve the legal measures against violence against women at work, and we're very alive to those new forms of harassment and violence. Our other plan then is for affordable childcare, because we know that in many member states the cost of child in childcare is equivalent of another mortgage. People just can't afford it, and they sit down, they do the sums, and they say, well, actually it's costing us more for you to go to work. And because women are paid less, the women say, well, it's better for the family if I step back, you know, and so challenging that is for us all about making sure to increase pay. There's one thing I do want to say about the cost of living crisis, though. We have a 6-point plan on that, and I know I don't have time to explain the 6-point plan, but the reason we have a 6-point plan is because it's like a Rubik cube. So you can't take action, you know, you remember the Rubik cubes. So you can't take action on one side without it affecting another side, and you have to take action on all 6 sides for the whole thing to come together and work. So we have 6 things we're calling for. The first and foremost is pay, because this is the cost of living crisis. It's not a wages crisis. The wages, all of this discussion that wages are increasing inflation, economists should be ashamed of themselves for saying that. The second problem then is to make sure there's targeted payments. And I do want to say a word about women on pensions. Like women on pensions, the pension pay gap is 29%. And they have no opportunity now to improve their circumstance. And so that women on pensions is hardly ever gets the focus that it should get, and it's only on occasions like this where we have an opportunity for women to be invited and to make their voice heard. The second thing about increasing in line with inflation the payment to pensioners. The third has to be taxes. We can't have things like affordable childcare and all the public services that women rely on to go to work if there isn't taxes on those who can afford it. And some companies have windfall profits. They're making
absolutely.
So there needs to be a clear demand for those who have most to pay the way. The fourth thing then is to end speculation and the energy market. I promise now this is the last one.
Thank you.
And the fifth one then is to involve the agents, so to involve women workers and their trade unions in all of the discussions at the company level, at the national level, and at European level.
Thank you very much. Kat, some comments on what you've heard and the questions that have been asked? There's also the question of porn, right? And how women are really facing a lot of onslaught of porn and violence online.
Yeah, and I think, there are a few things you can comment on, right? There's you can talk about the actual content and just really the overall responsibilities of policymakers, but also of these social platforms themselves to do a better job in terms of not just regulating, but actually also putting in place the ability to enforce those regulations when it comes to protecting the most vulnerable online. But I'd also really just like to comment on the overall tone and something that I'm actually really relieved to hear is something that almost seems like, I would say, like a seething anger at the kind of injustice that we're facing right now, and at the fact that this is my first forum, but it's true. Like, how many of us have been on panels where we've spoken about this in committees and boards and so on, and it's true that as a larger community that is constantly just voicing our overall frustration and despair around the topics, it makes me wonder, like, if there were only 3 things, for example, that we should succeed in doing or pushing as a community overall, right? Like in the next, say, year or so, what would those 3 things be? Because sometimes, like as with many social movements, but especially this one, there's always that worry somehow that we focus on too many things.
So
and
what
then
would those things be, Kat? What would your 3 things be then?
Well, for me, at least, like, I will talk from a like a startup perspective.
Yeah.
100% that gender pay transparency directive. It's very hard to talk about. It's very hard to talk about equality and all of these things and just have initiatives and not have that baseline.
I'd like to speed you up because I'm sorry, I've been told that I have to wind up. So.
Okay, all right. Well, then I can stop there because if we do that, there's already a lot.
Yes, you said the pay gap. 2.
There's already that can happen. I think 2, again on my side, the European Commission, we're not just policymakers, we're LPs. We inject a tremendous amount of funding, and I say this also as a member of the European Union. We inject a tremendous amount of funding. If we can condition some of that funding also to have a better distribution for different genders, then that would be great. And 3, I don't know. I think I will, I don't come with all the answers here. I'm sure the answer is somewhere in the room and it'll happen by the end of the day.
No, but thank you very much for that contribution. Absolutely. So, Evelyn, I'm going to come to you with the question, the frustration. Everybody's saying we've been talking about this endlessly. I remember we've been talking about it endlessly as well. And meanwhile, at national level, local level, governments are being elected, which are pushing back on gains that have been made, but also preventing further progress. As a politician,
I just would like to say, first of all, I'm so happy that there is this impatience and the anger in the room, because there is no gender equality if we don't strengthen women's rights. So there's not such a thing like consensual sex, because, I mean, what is that non-consensual sex? That's rape. So therefore, if we are, and when we are interfering, and we do that, even governments at all levels are just saying, so somehow it's a question of subsidiarity, what you're talking about when you go in on the streets together with our fantastic women in Poland and other countries fighting for abortion rights. We are just fighting for fundamental rights, and that's all part of the whole picture. For really reaching gender equality, we need women being capable to determine on their own what's going on with their bodies, with their brains, with everything. And therefore, it's needed to have the pay transparency, because it's about financing your life. It's about paying your bills. It's about having your pension. It's about everything that is dealing with economic independence at all positions, in the top positions, in the medium positions, and also at home. And of course, it has to do a lot with all sorts of violence and keeping away all those interfering. So somehow European gender equality requires interfering, supporting each other at all levels, within the European institutions and at all levels. And therefore, I just can congratulate and take on board this anger, this impatience, because it has to be reflected in our legislation we're putting on the table, but of course also when it's about implementation. And I think here there are the board is fluent, as you say. It is the necessity. We have to support each other at all levels. And this, with all those facts and figures, we have to gain and we have to get and we have to take on board.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Evelyn. So with that, I have to bring this panel to a close. Please give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you, Kat, for joining us online. Esther, thank you very much. Clara and Evelyn as well. Thank you.